Hey, it's Dr. Charles, aka CoachMD. In my over 30 years of medical practice, I've made it my goal to help you create a great life by achieving a strong mind, a healthy body, and an unshakable spirit. What I want to talk to you today about is biases. Now, we've heard a lot about this in our in the world today, and certain groups are targeted as having more bias than others. But in reality, all human beings possess what I've labeled the automatic brain. And the automatic brain is our primitive or animalistic nature. And the automatic brain only responds to dangers, threats, or vulnerabilities with two reactions: fight or flight. All human beings have this. If somebody tells you that they don't have an automatic brain, and it's those people over there who do, well, I would run very quickly the other way because that's not the case. Every human being has an automatic brain that try to protect us like the animals do from any types of dangers, and we fight and flee. And one of the ways we do that is by developing certain biases. And these certain biases allow or try to insulate us from danger, tries to protect us from our potential competitors. And I think it's important to take a look at this. And this is a detailed article. I think it's unbelievable how it lays out the different biases that our brain, our automatic brain, will go to help elevate us in our lives, to try to insulate us from danger. So let's take a look at this. And these are a list of common cognitive biases. So anytime you see the word cognition, you think of brain and brain activity. So let's look at the certain the certain different biases that exist. The first is what's called a confirmation bias, and a confirmation bias is seen a lot, especially in medical literature. It's a tendency to listen more often to information that confirms our existing beliefs, not only in medical literature, but how about with our politics these days? Through this bias, people tend to favor information that reinforces the things they already think or believe. Examples are only paying attention to information that confirms your beliefs about issues such as gun control or global warming, only following people on social media who share your viewpoints, choosing news sources that present stories that support your views, refusing to listen to the opposing side, not considering all of the facts in a logical and rational matter. This is confirmation bias. There are a few reasons why this happens. One is that only seeking to confirm existing opinions helps limit mental resources we need to use to make decisions. It also helps protect self-esteem by making people feel that their beliefs are accurate. So it's a way to elevate ourselves. It's a way to protect us, to put us on a higher plane. Again, this automatic brain I talk about. People on two sides of an issue can listen to the same story and walk away with different interpretations that they feel validates their existing point of view. This is often indicative that the confirmation bias is working to, quote, bias their opinions. The problem with this is that it leads to poor choices, an inability to listen to opposing views, or even contribute to othering people who hold different opinions. Very important. And it doesn't talk about the confirmation bias that's seen in medical studies, but that is also very important and unfortunately doesn't allow us real, in, real debate sometimes. The hindsight bias. The hindsight bias is a common cognitive bias that involves the tendency to see events, even random ones, as more predictable than they are. It's also commonly referred to as the, quote, I knew it all along phenomenon. Some examples of the hindsight bias include insisting that you knew who was going to win a football game once the event is over, believing that you knew all along that one political candidate was going to win an election, saying that you knew you weren't going to win after losing a coin flip with a friend, looking back on an exam and thinking that you knew the answers to the questions you missed, believing you could have predicted which stocks would become profitable. The hindsight bias occurs for a combination of reasons. And I'm going to kind of go through this because it's a pretty long article. I'm going to leave the link below so you can click on it if you want to get more information. And while you're at it, subscribe to my channel. If you like what I see, if you don't like what I see, what I have to say, then let me know what you'd like to see more of, or comment below and let me know your feelings about this article. The hindsight bias occurs for a combination of reasons, including our ability to misremember previous predictions, our tendency to view events as inevitable, and our tendency to believe we could have foreseen certain events. The effect of this bias is that it causes us to overestimate our ability, again, to elevate us to a particular level. And by elevating us to a particular level, it insulates us. It puts us above others, so it insulates us from potential danger. It's fake insulation, but cognitively, it does it on a mental level. This can sometimes lead people to take unwise risks. The anchoring bias. The anchoring bias is the tendency to be overly influenced by the first piece of information that we hear. Some examples of how this works: the first number voiced during a price negotiation typically becomes the anchoring point from which all further negotiations are based. Hearing a random number can influence estimates on completely unrelated topics. Doctors can become susceptible to the anchoring bias when diagnosing patients. I've seen this. The physician's first impressions of the patient often create an anchoring point that can sometimes incorrectly influence all subsequent diagnostic assessments. And also another one that's not mentioned here is first sight, your first impression. It can be cause an anchoring bias. While the existence of the anchoring bias is well documented, its causes are still not fully understood. Some research suggests that the source of the anchor information may play a role. Other factors such as priming and mood also appear to have an influence. And I'll give you another, what I think is the reasoning before anchoring bias. It's so we can make a quick split-second decision. So that can put us in a better, supposedly to the automatic brain, our primitive nature, it can put us in a position that may be better, put us in a better position to help keep us from danger. So we can make that split-second decision to keep us from danger. It's not always good. Most of the time it isn't, but it allows us our primitive animalistic nature, to know whether we need to fight or flee right away. Like other cognitive biases, anchoring can have an effect on the decisions you make every day. For instance, it can influence how much you are willing to pay for your home. However, it can sometimes lead to poor choices and make it more difficult for people to consider other factors that might also be important. The misinformation effect. The misinformation effect is a tendency for memories to be heavily influenced by things that happen after the actual event itself. A person who witnesses a car accident or crime might believe that their recollection is crystal clear, but researchers have found that memory is surprisingly susceptible to even very subtle influences. This happens all the time when we try to remember what happened to us in childhood. We try to recall certain events, just get totally misshapen, but due to that misshapen and that portrait that's painted, we go on forward in life and we do that misinformation. We create scenarios in our brain to kind of develop certain storylines, and these are always to help protect us from danger. And that's the automatic brain is storing this, and it may not store it accurately. So, for instance, if you spill milk when you're 5 years old, and your father or mother says, "You stupid idiot," well, misremembering that is going to could be later in life, if you're avoiding situations that might put you in a clumsy situation where something might happen because you don't want to be viewed as that stupid person because you've made that association. So misinformation effect is really making associations that really aren't true, but carrying on further in life when you look back at it. So in order to fight or flee, actually not similar, but what the brain detects as similar situations. For example, research has shown that simply asking questions about an event can change someone's memory of what happened. Watching television coverage may change how people remember the event. Hearing other people talk about a memory from their perspective may change your memory of what transpired. So when I was, oh, going to date myself here, right? I was soon to be 4 years old when President Kennedy was shot. And I was my family was living in Washington D.C. We were living in an apartment complex, and all of a sudden, my mother comes running in to the room, screaming, "President Kennedy's been shot! President Kennedy's been shot!" She must have been totally traumatized because she forgot that she had a 4-year-old child there, right? "Oh, President Kennedy's been shot! President Kennedy's been shot!" Just as she was crying that, and I heard that, I heard an ambulance outside the window going by. For the longest time, no matter how much I learned about those events, I learned that President Kennedy was shot in Dallas, Texas. For the longest time, misinformation in my brain, it was imprinted that I heard President Kennedy's ambulance. Yet, no matter how much I heard that that was wrong, it took me probably to my teenage years before I can finally displace the fact that no, I did not hear President Kennedy's ambulance. So that's how strong misinformation bias can be. There are a few factors that may play a role in this phenomenon. New information may get blended with old memories. In other cases, new information may be used to fill in the gaps in memory. So the new information that I got was, yes, he was shot in Dallas, so that was able to correct that misinformation bias that I had. The effects of misinformation can range from the trivial to much more serious. It might cause you to misremember something you thought happened at work, or it might lead to someone incorrectly identifying the wrong suspect in a criminal case. The actor-observer bias. The actor-observer bias is the tendency to attribute our actions to external influences and other people's actions to internal ones. The way we perceive others and how we attribute their actions hinges on a variety of variables, but it can be heavily influenced by whether we are the actor or the observer in a situation. When it comes to our own actions, we are often far too likely to attribute things to external influences. For example, you might complain that you botched an important meeting because you had jet lag. You might say you failed an exam because the teacher posed too many trick questions. So the actor observer bias takes the personal responsibility away from us. When it comes to explaining other people's actions, however, we are far more likely to attribute their behaviors to internal causes. For example, a colleague screwed up an important presentation because he's lazy and incompetent, not because he also had jet lag. A fellow student bombed a test because they lacked diligence and intelligence, and not because they took the same test as you with all those trick questions. While there are many factors that may play a role, perspective plays a key role. The problem with this is that it often leads to misunderstandings. Each side of a situation is essentially blaming the other side rather than thinking about all the variables that might be playing a role. The false consensus effect. The false consensus effect is the tendency people have to overestimate how much other people agree with their own beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, and values. For example, thinking that other people share your opinion on controversial topics, overestimating the number of people who are similar to you, believing that the majority of people share your preferences. Researchers believe that the false consensus effect happens for a variety of reasons. First, the people we spend the most time with, our family and friends, do often tend to share very similar opinions and beliefs. Because of this, we start to think that this is a way of thinking is the majority opinion. This can lead people not only to incorrectly think that everyone else agrees with them, it can sometimes lead to overvalue their own opinions. Again, this is our way to insulate ourselves from danger. It also means that we sometimes don't consider how other people might feel when making choices. So our brain defaults to try to protect us, yet it totally sabotages us because it's not a true protective, it's not true protection because we're not identifying with other people. This is the danger of biases. We all have them, not only one group. You notice here, this is not political, this is not racial, this is not socioeconomic. These biases are general, and all of us have them. The halo effect. The halo effect is the tendency for an initial impression of a person to influence what we think of them overall, also known as the physical attractiveness stereotype, or the quote, what is beautiful is good principle. We are either influenced by or use the halo to influence others almost every day. For example, thinking people who are good looking are also smarter, kinder, and funnier than less attractive people. Believing that products marketed by attractive people are also more valuable. Thinking that a political candidate who is confident must also be intelligent and competent. You may not know this, but height bias is this halo effect. Now, I'm somebody of shorter stature. I feel I'm the victim of halo bias in many ways. When I was younger, trying to get a date, I had women. One woman who I dated, she told me that when her friends had seen me earlier in the year, they had said that, oh, he's kind of cute, but too bad he's not taller, right? So I was the victim of that halo, right? And also the president, people we elect as president, we or CEOs. If you look at the statistics, most of those people are of larger stature, of taller stature, because of this halo effect. Because they are viewed, taller people are generally viewed as being more confident or stronger, more secure, right? So that's part of the halo bias. One factor that may influence the halo effect is our tendency to want to be correct. It's if our initial impression of someone was positive, we want to look for proof that our assessment was accurate. Again, that automatic brain, that protective instinct that we all have. This cognitive bias can have a powerful impact in the real world. For example, job applicants perceived as attractive and likable are also more likely to be viewed as competent, smart, and more qualified for the job. The self-serving bias. The self-serving bias is a tendency for people, let's read this over because I'm not sure if the writing is so good. The self-serving bias is a tendency for people to give themselves credit for successes, but lay the blame for failures in outside causes. When you do well on a project, you probably assume that it's because you worked hard. But when things turn out badly, you're more likely to blame it on circumstances or bad luck or other people. Some examples of this: attributing good grades to being smart or studying hard, believing your athletic performance is due to practice and hard work, thinking you got the job because of your merits. That's okay, but the self-serving bias can be influenced by a variety of factors. Age and sex have been shown to play a part. Older people are more likely to take credit for their successes, while men are more likely to pin their failures on outside forces. And that's from a study. That's not my own words. This bias does serve an important role in protecting self-esteem, and that's important. So self-serving bias could be beneficial. However, it can also lead to faulty attributions, such as blaming others for your own shortcomings. So that's what I was mentioning before. The availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is the tendency to estimate the probability of something happening based on how many examples readily come to mind. Some examples of this: After seeing several news reports of car thefts in your neighborhood, you might start to believe that such crimes are more common than they are. You might believe that plane crashes are more common than they really are because you can easily think of several examples. Think about how dangerous this is with the media. When the media focuses and highlights certain events that really are not that common, we start to think of them as more common. And this is the availability heuristic because these stats are more available to us. And those things that we personally experience are also more available to us. It is essentially a mental shortcut designed to save us time when we are trying to determine risk. Again, this is all automatic brain. We're trying to assess and navigate the world to try to protect us from danger, threats, or vulnerability so we know what we have to fight or flee. And we try to do that instantaneously. But by doing that, we formulate all these biases. The problem with relying on this way of thinking is that it often leads to poor estimates and bad decisions. Smokers who have never known someone to die of smoking related illness, for example, might underestimate the health risks of smoking. In contrast, if you have 2 sisters and 5 neighbors who have had breast cancer, you may believe it is even more common than the statistics suggest. I think the availability heuristic is really shown greatly in the way that media covers certain statistics and crimes. The optimism bias. The optimism bias is a tendency, and this is probably the biggest one, being overly optimistic. The optimism bias is a tendency to overestimate the likelihood that good things will happen to us while underestimating the probability that negative events will impact our lives. Essentially, we tend to be too optimistic for our own good. For example, we may assume that negative events won't affect us, such as divorce, job loss, illness, and death. The optimism bias has its roots in the availability heuristic. Because you can probably think of examples of bad things happening to other people, it seems more likely that others will be affected by negative events. Other people, not you. This bias can lead people to take health risks like smoking, eating poorly, or not wearing a seatbelt. The bad news is that research found that this optimism bias is incredibly difficult to reduce, meaning it's going to happen to them, but not me. Now, I'm a very optimistic person, and I think being optimistic is better for your health, but it's also not it's not good to be foolish. And you need to understand that no matter how optimistic you are, if you are undertaking risky lifestyles and behaviors, no amount of optimism is going to make those turn out better. There is good news, however. This tendency towards optimism, what I'm saying, helps create a sense of anticipation for the future, giving people the hope and motivation they need to pursue their goals. So it can be beneficial, but on the other hand, it can be very negative when you ignore the and take on unacceptable risk because you just don't think it's going to happen to you. The cognitive biases above the cognitive biases above are common, but the cognitive biases are common. But this is only a sampling of the many biases that can affect your thinking. These biases collectively influence much of our thoughts and ultimately decision making. Many of these biases are inevitable. We simply don't have the time to evaluate every thought and every decision for the presence of any bias. Understanding these biases is very helpful in learning how they can lead us to poor decisions in life. But more importantly, I have a saying that there are only 2 things that we need to remember when we are trying for success in life, and those have to do with ourself, and it has to do with self-honesty and self-discipline. Self-honesty is the ability to take a step back and view these biases in ourselves. Now, again, no one group holds the monopoly or corners the market on biases, no matter what anybody tells you. Whether the media tries to use the availability heuristic and tries to highlight certain statistics to try to make it seem as though one group has these biases more than another. Anytime that's the case and that's the argument, you need to run the other way. This allows us the ability to engage in true self-dialogue and self-honesty. Let me know what you think. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. And until next time, I'm Dr. Charles, urging you to stay strong in mind, in body, and in soul. Bye for now. Hey, Dr. Charles, CoachMD. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure to like and comment below. I'd love to hear from you. If you think you have a friend who might benefit from this video, share it with them. For access to exclusive content, support my Patreon. There you'll get private access to videos, meditations, health tips, even relationship and financial tips. You'll have a say in what I produce and be able to participate in a monthly call with me. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. See you soon.